Hi, and welcome to the podcast. Today, we are going to be talking about using parent coaching for language development through play with Emily Cohen, who is a speech language pathologist. The learning outcomes for today will be, we will learn strategies for parent coaching, describe child-led play and playing with purpose, name strategies for supporting language growth during child-led play, and identify types of toys and books that support language growth. Before we get started, we will disclose our relevant financial disclosures. I have the following relevant financial relationships to disclose. I receive payments from Tassel Learning, royalties from my 4 children's books, and payments from my course, Helping Your Child Communicate. Emily has the following relationships to disclose. She's the owner of Tandem Speech Therapy in Austin, Texas. She's the creator of Playing with Purpose, and she receives compensation for materials sold under the Playing with Purpose name. So I'm so excited to have Emily with us today. She is the founder of Tandem Speech Therapy, a pediatric speech therapy practice in Austin, Texas, and the creator of the Playing with Purpose framework. She has a special interest in helping caregivers feel empowered to support their child's language development. And her Instagram account is @tandemspeech. Hi, Emily.
Hey, Kara.
Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, so can you tell everyone what you've been up to these days?
Yeah. So I started my private practice about 5 years ago, and just this fall, so fall of 2021, I took my practice from being all telepractice during the pandemic to opening an office space here in Austin. And that's been really exciting for me. It's gotten me more involved and back to working with families who have really young children, which is kind of where my passion as an SLP lies. And so that's been super fun and just, enjoying and getting ready for the hot summer season here in Texas.
Awesome. Yeah, Emily and I are both in Texas, so it's fun. We're both in Austin.
Yes.
All right, so let's get started. So why is parent coaching so valuable in early intervention speech therapy?
I think the first thing that is important for us as SLPs to be mindful of is that when we're working with kids in early intervention, or really in kind of all areas of speech therapy, we see a kiddo for such a small amount of time of their whole week and their month and their year. Right? Like for most of the clients that I work with, I see kids in my office for sessions that are about 45 minutes once or twice a week. And there are so many other minutes in their days. And so I think that it's really important for us as SLPs to not only support and, do some direct intervention with the really young kids, but also to really support their caregivers so that they can learn and maybe make adjustments to how they've been interacting with their kids at home so that they can kind of take all the tools that we have in our tool belt as SLPs and implement them at home when they're playing and interacting with their kiddos.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's great. I agree. I think that it's great to train the parents to help kind of have those skills be implemented throughout the day, everything that is done in speech therapy in the sessions.
Yeah.
So,
And also I think, like kids often have really like solid relationships with their caregivers, whoever their primary caregiver might be. And that person or people are really good at engaging and keeping kiddos' attention. And we know that kind of prolonging interactions with kids, whether it's through play or through like daily activities like bath time, and really keeping their attention is going to be really valuable because kids often learn the most from the people that they spend the most time with.
definitely. So can you tell me a little bit about playing with purpose? I know you coined that term. And can you tell me how you start?
Yeah. So playing with purpose is kind of the idea that we've been talking about already. The idea that we can, as speech pathologists and as caregivers and parents and educators, we can take all of those interactions, whether it's play or daily activities, and really slow ourselves down as the adults interacting with the kids and be really purposeful and intentional about how we interact with kids. In this case, we're specifically talking about to support or increase their speech and language development. And so this kind of project started as an idea that a girlfriend of mine here in Austin had when she had her first kiddo, who is about to go to kindergarten now. And it started as a blog and then kind of expanded. And now I have it as a book, and there's some resources on Teachers Pay Teachers and things like that. And a lot of the work that I do in speech therapy for early intervention, and when I'm talking about playing with purpose, kind of has a foundation in what I learned when I was trained by the Hannon Center and their It Takes Two to Talk program. And I was exposed to that really early in my career as an SLP. And it's been, it's just kind of guided everything that I've done as a speech pathologist since then. And so the idea is really, again, about being mindful and intentional. And that doesn't mean that like 24 hours a day as a caregiver or for your entire session as a speech pathologist, you have we can't do everything all the time, but it's about, again, tuning in to the child's interests, tuning into where they're at developmentally and what they might benefit from in terms of maybe expanding their language, and then making choices about like the words that we use to interact with them as their play partner, making intentional choices about the toys and the books that we provide children to play with, and really getting down on their level and interacting in, what we refer to as child-led play, or letting the child guide the interaction and us being there as the adult to support and further, help their language skills grow.
Mm-hmm. And I know you said helping parents make empowered choices for toys and books. I really like how you use the word empowered there. And can you tell me a bit about what that looks like?
Yeah. So I think my people who maybe are familiar with my work or have read either the book or things on the blog or on social media, like I always say that my number one tip to parents and caregivers when they're thinking about the toys that they put in their playroom or that their child has the opportunity to play with, my number one recommendation is always to try to think about going back to the basics and limit or completely eliminate the use of toys with batteries. Mm-hmm. So I don't remember exactly like where the research, I read this like years ago, or another speech pathologist that I worked with had shared with me some research that had been done where they did like, I don't know if it was like CT or like MRI imaging on kiddos, and we're looking at brain activity when kids were playing, and or some other kind of imaging study. And they were looking at sort of like the synapses, right? What was firing in the kiddos' brains and what connections were being developed. And when children played with more like what I would describe as like constructive toys, so things like blocks or maybe some kind of toy house or cars versus some kind of, toy that has buttons that maybe you push and there's lights and sounds and things like that, there was infinitely more brain activity going on for the kids that were interacting with these more basic toys. And so I like to think of it as the idea that instead of the toy doing all of the work, our children are getting the opportunity to do the work. And not only does that support their speech and language development, but there's also tons of other components of development that this is really valuable for, like problem solving and things related to social interaction, which does, fall under, kind of our scope of practice as speech language pathologists. And that doesn't mean that when you walk into a parent's house and, they have some toy, that plays music or makes sounds and has like bells and whistles and lights and things like that, that like we say like, oh, throw that toy away. There are lots of toys that I actually have in my speech therapy room that came with batteries. Like the one that comes to me first is that piggy bank toy. I think maybe Fisher Price makes it. I don't remember, but it's pink and it's a piggy bank. And it comes with like 10 different coins, and it's a battery operated toy, right? There's a switch you can turn it on and off. And I have that toy in my speech therapy room. I just took the batteries out, and there's virtually nothing the toy doesn't do that the toy maker intended for it to do. Just instead of the toy playing music or counting or saying color words, right, as the caregivers or as a speech pathologist, we can choose what language we want to use to stimulate a child, because we know that, let's say you're playing with a 2-year-old. Well, it's fine if your 2-year-old learns their colors or if your 2-year-old learns how to count. But that's not necessarily going to be the most valuable language or vocabulary for your child. Kids early in communication really need words and language to help them often get their needs met, to interact with us or with peers. And those kind of like what I would describe as academic skills, especially for kids that have a delay in their language, it's just not going to be the most functional vocabulary for them to have.
Yeah. And Emily, can you talk a bit more about what some of your favorite toys are that are, the basic toys, or some things that parents may have around the house that can be used as toys?
Yeah. So I think this, like the next point that we see is that I like to remind parents that not all toys come from the toy store. So, I'm sure most of us have been, whether it's your own house or been at someone else's house that has children, and, kids are crawling around or toddling around in the kitchen, and they're opening the drawers and taking out, maybe it's like food storage containers or wooden spoons and bowls. And all those things that capture your child's attention can be used for play. And so there are lots of things that, we might classify as everyday objects that can be used for play. Like one of the sort of toys that I've been playing with a lot with some of my speech therapy clients is like a salad spinner. I just have like the super inexpensive one that I think was from IKEA. Full disclosure, I found it curbside in a box that said free from a neighbor, but even better. And I use it for all kinds of things. It's a great toy to, right, there's some movement and interaction that kids can do on their own, or often children like to watch it spin. And what I'll do is take components of other toys and put it inside. It can be a great activity, and I love activities that kids can't necessarily do on their own. So I think as speech language pathologists, a lot of us have toys in our speech therapy rooms, or that are in boxes. So I like using clear boxes a lot as a way to kind of encourage a child to maybe communicate at whatever level, to have you open the box, or in this case with the salad spinner, like the lid is kind of tricky to get off, and to do like the motion of actually making it spin is a little bit challenging. So, there's all these opportunities in those moments where kiddos need our support as adults to encourage or model different types of communication that they can then use in all kinds of activities. So that's a big one. I love just like I was saying, I tell parents, maybe this, I feel like this gets less and less relevant as I get older and the parents I'm working with are younger, but I tell parents to think about the toys that they played with as a kiddo, right? Like battery powered toys just like weren't a thing so much when I was a kid. But like some of my favorite like companies that make toys are Melissa and Doug makes really great. They have tons of wooden toys. So they're super long lasting, but I can't think of like a single sort of battery operated or toy that kind of can do things on its own without your child interacting with it in some way, right? They have lots of toys for pretend play, things like that. So I love, like wooden toys, so things like blocks or cars or a toy house, any kind of, if your child has, or the kids you're working with have a character that they really like from a book or a show, right? There's tons of figurines for all different, types of characters. And so those are always great. And we can combine, like I was saying before, when I was talking about the salad spinner, I have to try to like, kind of like mesh, two different toys together. So maybe we have, a character from Bluey or something that your kiddo is really into. And then you have blocks that you can, or magnet tiles, and you can build a house or something like that.
Yeah, those are great examples. And I like when you make a point about kind of those basic toys, those wooden toys, some pretend play toys. And I like your idea of taking the batteries out of some of the toys because you can still have them in your home. So what can you talk a bit about when you say caregivers are a child's favorite toy?
Yeah, so there's lots of activities that we do with kids where as the adult, we're really the thing that the child is interacting with versus some other external toy or object. And so we sometimes refer to that as like people play. So sort of games like peekaboo or I don't do this so much anymore post-pandemic, but like any kind of like song that has movement. I would often like sit on the floor and have a child kind of like sitting on my lap but facing me, and we would do like the row, row, row your boat song, right? And there's kind of movement and interaction. So all of those, hide and seek, even just like if you have a swing set or you take a child to the park or have an opportunity to play outside, even though maybe you place a child in the swing, right? Most kids, especially when we're talking about our really young clients, like that are early childhood intervention age, so kids under the age of 3, those kids often can't sort of operate a swing on their own. They're going to need our support as a caregiver. And so there's all kinds of opportunities in those interactions to support language.
Yeah, definitely. And then I know you talk about less being more in play with toys. Can you talk a bit about that?
Yeah. So one of the things that I like to suggest to the parents that I work with is to kind of pare down the environment of toys and activities for your child at any one time. We can read a lot about toy rotations, and those can be really valuable. Sometimes I think for kids, by again making sort of intentional choices about the environment, we can really facilitate their development. So we can kind of support kids and support kind of how their attention grows by limiting choices. I remember prior to having my office space for tandem speech, I traveled and I saw some kids at home and I saw some kids at like preschool settings. And some of the children I worked with were really fortunate to have like just playrooms with like anything, you could think of under the sun. And what was fairly common for me to see is that there were so many things that captured their attention. Kids would bounce around a lot. So maybe they would, sit down and put a few pieces into a puzzle, and then they turn their head and something else grabs their attention. And so they're toddling off. And while there's nothing inherently, quote unquote, wrong with that, having sustained attention can be really valuable for, learning and growth kind of as a child develops and gets older. And also we know that when we can kind of prolong an activity or an interaction as, an adult interacting with a child, the longer we can prolong an activity, the more opportunity we have to support or stimulate their language, however we're choosing to do that. And so all of that is really valuable. So I often will suggest to parents, maybe pick 3 or 4 toys and have those out for whether it's a few weeks or a month or, whatever fits their lifestyle. And I think just less is more relates back to that idea of being mindful that not all toys come from a toy store. I feel like, especially around the holidays, I hear stories from parents or from friends that, oh, I got my kid this, super awesome dollhouse, and all they wanted to do was play with the box that it came in, right? not the toy that, somebody just sent them. And so I think that kind of relates to that idea of less being more. It doesn't necessarily have to be super flashy or anything that even costs a lot of money.
Yeah. I definitely agree with that. And I think it is really important to kind of have that toy rotation and to have less toys available for your child to play with, because I have seen definitely that the child kind of figures out how to play with a toy in different ways when there isn't something to immediately go to after they're kind of done with one toy. They're like, okay, well, this is what's out, so let me see what else I can do. And that's true with younger children and older children too, I think. So
yeah, I think that's a really good point too.
I love that idea. And the last point on this slide or this topic is you mentioned incorporating movement and multisensory experiences in play.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk a bit about
that? I mean, the more that we kind of when we're providing kids with multisensory experiences, we're engaging all different parts of their brain. And that's just going to, again, kind of help all those connections that we want their brain to build and develop, especially in those early years when we can kind of cement and help things grow for them. It's just really valuable. So that's why I talk about, getting outside if you have the opportunity to do that. Or just, maybe sometimes I'll tell parents to if they have an empty space in the house, or maybe sometimes, as parents, we maybe put less toys and things in a child's room where they're going to sleep at night to kind of reduce the environment there. That can often be a good place to maybe go and occasionally play, because there's all this space to move around and interact with the environment. And we just know all those different experiences when we're engaging their whole body, engaging their auditory skills, if they have, intact or, not significantly impacted hearing and vision. And, just all kinds of activities where we really have to get our hands in, their cooking and, other kinds of constructive play with things like Play-Doh or a water table or a sandbox. Just engage all different parts of our sensory system. And then by engaging all those different components of our sensory system, it also gives us opportunities to stimulate other kinds of language. So I've been talking a lot recently to some of the parents of the kids that I'm working with that are kind of almost they're kind of stuck in a phase of their development where they have a lot of vocabulary of object words, of nouns, and they're really struggling to start to combine words. And this is like, we're talking about kids on a really traditional trajectory of language acquisition. And we know that helping kids have a diverse vocabulary, meaning they have lots of different types of words, will, kind of give them opportunity to start to combine words together. Because most often when we're communicating, we don't string a bunch of nouns together, right? We put different types of words together. So multisensory play can really support some of that development of vocabulary that are words that are like attributes and adjectives. But also, helping kids develop, a vocabulary that includes, action words or words that we would classify as verbs is also really valuable too.
Yeah, definitely. Like all those verbs like push, pull, jump, spin, and then also the adverbs like slowly, quickly, fast. Yeah, there's just so many words that can be introduced with movement and multisensory experiences and concepts as well.
Yeah.
I love that. Great. So let's see. Okay. And one of the core tenets of playing with purpose is child-led play. And can you talk about what that looks like? Some of what child-led play looks like?
Yeah. So, the central tenet of child-led play is really that we are letting the child lead the interaction. And kind of the converse of that is maybe some of the interaction that we might see in a really traditional school setting where we would have either teacher-led or adult-led activities. So the example that I like to share with parents, and this could be with if you have multiple children playing together or just you and a child, playing together. So let's say we have a set of blocks out. We were talking about how blocks are a really valuable activity or toy for kids. And so if you and a child are playing or a group of kids are playing, we might see them trying to stack the blocks up and try to build a tower, see how high a tower can reach before it falls over. Or just the idea, sometimes I'll like challenge kids, like, can you build a tower that's as tall as you are? And so this kind of will not only can support, maybe specific vocabulary or concepts, like we were just talking about vocabulary. So the idea of words that we classify as like prepositions or location words, the blocks go up, 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 or this block is under, things like that. So there's all that vocabulary. If we're talking and kind of supporting kids in maybe more of like a group setting, maybe you're a preschool SLP and you go into a preschool classroom and work with children, so we can support kids learning to cooperate and work together, which gives lots of opportunity for using language and social skills, which are things that we support as speech language pathologists. And so that compared to what we might see or what as an adult we might be inclined to talk about or do when we're interacting with kids building blocks, like something that I will sometimes see parents come into the therapy room and do is as they're stacking the blocks, which the construction of the activity looks the same, but the vocabulary or the language stimulation we're providing might look different. So parents or other people might be inclined to count as the blocks go up. So again, there's nothing inherently wrong with your child learning to count. It's just not going to be as functional, particularly for kids who might be delayed in their language acquisition, as having other types of vocabulary, like being able to ask for help or sharing with a peer and saying, this is yours, that is mine. And so, right, child-led play is kind of letting the child guide the interaction, and then us as the adult supporting and maybe providing language and providing language stimulation so that there is language embedded into the activity. So one thing that we often do as speech language pathologists is narrate a lot, right? We talk about what we see kids doing. We talk about oh, I see you putting the block on top. Uh-oh, the tower fell down. And that is just right? We're just narrating
Mhm.
what's going on. I talk about what I'm doing, what I see the child doing, so we can model different kinds of pronoun types of words and all different, like we were just talking about verbs and action words. So that's all really valuable. So it's really about the experience that the child is having and not the outcome. So the idea of child-led play is that we're playing and interacting with the child on their level, letting the child guide the interactions without any expectations.
Mhm.
So without kind of preconceived notions about what play should look like, or how you are supposed to play with a specific toy. So I think that's really important to be mindful of. We want to be really responding to what the child might say or what they're doing. So that's, again, providing and giving language during the interaction. And kind of this last point that we can see is like supporting the activity without directing it. That's exactly, what I'm talking about. Letting the child guide the interaction, playing and responding to what the child is doing without being the one in charge, which as a parent or caregiver, even as a speech language pathologist, can sometimes be really hard.
Mhm. Yeah, I definitely think that kind of letting go of your agenda for the play, because even sometimes I'll see a child has a really cool toy, and I'll be like, "Oh, look at this! Let's play with this. Let's do." And then the child has no interest in it, and I think my initial sometimes I'm like, "Oh, well, let me try to entice you to look at this," but
Mhm.
really, child-led play is following what the child's interests are and supporting that, because um, I feel like the benefits are so great, because when a child is interested in something, they're learning more. And when they're not,
Mhm.
they're not. So what do you think about that? What are the benefits of child-led play, and how does that look different from like parent directed or clinician directed play?
Mhm. So I think you make a really good point about, it's like when a child chooses an activity, right? It's like, it's really like, it's what they're interested in. And they are most likely to kind of have sustained attention, even if like we're talking about 2 or 3 minutes. There are tons of opportunities to support and stimulate language in 2 or 3 minutes when we're interacting with a kiddo. And so if the child is choosing the activity, they're more likely, like you said, to be interested in it and stay playing with it. So that's like one of the huge benefits. It's the idea of like meeting them where they're at. And then kind of what we can do is, instead of directing what is happening or what the child is doing, sidebar though, I love what you were just talking about how like maybe you show up at a kiddo's house and they have this like new toy that you think is like so exciting. Like I had this happen to me just literally yesterday. I got a new toy from a neighbor that I think is super fun, and like I wanted to play with it because I hadn't really like used it very much, and I had this like 3 or 4 ideas of what to do with one of my clients, and I was like, oh hey, so and so, like let's play with this new gear toy, it's so fun. And like we took the box out. I mean, they willingly like took the box out, they opened it, and they were like, no. And I was like, okay, well, we still have 40 minutes. So okay, Emily, like take a step back, like let's just see where this goes. And, thankfully there were plenty of opportunities and things that we did to support their development. But yeah, like if I had sort of quote unquote forced this child to play with this toy on my agenda, it's like that idea of like in one ear out the other. We're not helping that child form those connections because they're just not invested and interested in it. And it's really about helping them form more connections in their brain, which are going to allow them to use more language over time as we continue to stimulate it.
Definitely. And I think that also goes for books as well, because I know a lot of times parents with kids under 3 we hear so much about how reading to young kids is so beneficial, but I always tell parents, if a child is not interested in a book anymore, that's okay. It's okay to do 1 or 2 pages, or the same page 5 times, and then put the book aside.
Or it's okay to not read the words on the page.
Definitely. Can you tell a little bit more about how you adapt some books with young kids?
Yeah, so I think one of the things that I like to kind of talk to some of the parents I work with about, and again, we're talking about kids who are following like a much more traditional path to language acquisition. So kind of some of that making intentional choices is about that choice of vocabulary, choice of the words that we use. So I do a lot of parent education, and we talk about what maybe for kids that have some words in their vocabulary and we're looking to add more functional words for them. I like to help parents think about, we might make a list of all the words that they have and look at the sounds that we hear them saying, and then make a plan of what are, maybe the child uses the sound like the letter P, which we know is often an early developing sound for kids, and what other functional words can we use with a child and support and stimulate in their language that have that sound, that are going to let them kind of accomplish like lots of different things. So like we might use the word like push, because we can push lots of things in a book, especially if we're talking about like, a book maybe that there's like those polka dot books that are really fun, that have all kinds of different concepts that we can support a child with. But just the act of like pushing and popping the little dot in the book is super fun. It's also like quite satisfying as an adult. So I think about that a lot. And I just think about, again, we can use the book as a tool, just like toys can be a tool, but we don't have to read the story. So if we're talking about kind of helping a child expand their vocabulary and maybe expand I was talking before about giving them different types of words, maybe we're thinking about all those different action words. So instead of reading the story, we talk about what we see the people or the characters in the book doing and really focus on those action words versus whatever the story might be telling. And we can use the book as, especially if it's a book that the child is interested in, as a tool to stimulate that kind of language versus reading the story.
Yeah, that's great. Those are great pieces of advice. And I think that for a lot of times with young children, the pictures can be really engaging, and then sometimes the words are just too much. So just even saying like one sentence for the page, just kind of talking about what the picture does. Yeah. So you talked about what child-led play looks like. And now let's talk a bit about how to support language growth during child-led play. What are some?
So
go ahead. Sorry.
So one of the points I like to make and teach parents is about this idea of modeling without expectations. So that can look like a few different things. That might be modeling in terms of like, I might take the blocks and build a little like structure with them. And that's just modeling or showing a child one thing that they might be able to do with the blocks. But if they don't engage with that thing that I built, well, no big deal. It's not what they're interested in. And that can also be just modeling of language. So there's a strategy that I like to talk to a lot of parents about. I usually call it like add a word. So,
Mhm.
and this is a really, can be a really valuable strategy for traditional language learners who have a lot of single words in their vocabulary. And again, we're trying to help expand, what we would technically like expand their mean length of utterance, or, go from one word to 2-word phrases, or maybe 2 words to 3 words. So maybe we're playing with blocks and the child says block, or, some approximation of the word block. And I'll say, oh, block up. So every time I hear a child say a word, I'll model the word and respond back to them with the word they use plus add another word. And I'm just modeling. I'm doing that without expecting them to necessarily imitate or respond back to me. And then that kind of leads into this idea of waiting. And so waiting can look like, again, a couple of different things. So with this idea of me modeling an expanded phrase for a child, I might wait and look at them. We use a lot of nonverbal communication, like I'm, giving them an opportunity to imitate what I'm saying. But if they don't, I'm not going to I'm not going to correct the child or ask them to repeat after me, because we want the desire to communicate to come intrinsically for a child. If all a child does is repeat over and over, language kind of loses its value and its purpose.
Mhm.
So I might wait and give them an opportunity, because then if they do imitate, I then have the opportunity to respond, which gives their brain feedback that, oh, I did this new thing, or I did this thing and I got a response, which then feeds that loop of, it's like this positive feedback loop. Like I do something, I say something, you respond to me. I like that. There's intrinsic value in that interaction that we've had. And so that encourages me and my brain to do that same thing again.
Yeah. And I like what you say there, Emily, about giving an opportunity, but not kind of expecting a child or not requiring them to imitate before receiving an item. Because that's a lot about what I do in my sessions and what I coach parents on is you can give them an opportunity, but if they don't, that's okay. Because we don't want a child to get frustrated and feel like, oh, what's the point of interacting with you if all you're going to do is just try to get me to imitate these words.
Yeah. Especially if the words don't, what might seem valuable to us as an adult providing language might not feel valuable to a child, and we can't get inside their brain and really know what they're thinking and they're feeling. So I tell parents, and I'd be curious what you do. I tell parents to model without expectations twice, give a child 2 opportunities, maybe model the same thing twice and give them an opportunity to respond in whatever way. Maybe that is with their actions, or maybe that is with their words. And then if not, then we just move forward with the interaction. And this is happening so fast, it wouldn't look like we're necessarily doing anything that different, because it's not like we're waiting minutes. I usually tell parents wait, count to 5 in your head, and then
exactly. Yeah,
move forward and model something else.
I do something very similar. For example, if we're playing with a ball machine or a ball drop thing, I'll give a child, or tell the parent to give the child an opportunity. I'll just say, oh, hold it and wait. Or if the child doesn't have ball in their vocabulary and you're trying to get them to imitate, then I'll just say ball and wait. And if they imitate you, great. If they don't, you're at least providing that opportunity, and they're seeing the way your mouth moves, and they're kind of associating that a bit more. And there's just more time for them to process.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then I know the next point is providing opportunities. So the child wants to communicate. What does that look like kind of throughout the day or during play?
Yeah. So I think that goes back to some of the idea of being intentional about the toys, excuse me, that we choose, or just the environment in general. So one like super kind of like low barrier to entry tool that I'll talk to parents about, like especially, right, kids often go through a phase where they have like one toy that they like are super interested in, maybe for that day, for that week, for that month, however long it might be. So we can sort of, this is like an idea that I take from the Hand Center. It's like, we call it like creating opportunities for the child to communicate. Well, if we know it's something the child has demonstrated a lot of interest in, maybe like one afternoon while the child is napping, we can put the toy up on the counter in a spot where they can't reach it on their own. So that's just creating an opportunity for the child to communicate at whatever level that might be. That might be looking at the toy, indicating that they want it. It might be, maybe we're encouraging pointing. So it might be pointing to the toy. It might be using some kind of vocalization to request it, whatever, or it might be just naming the toy as it is, or, you know, that could be expanding the phrase instead of like, you know, pointing and saying ball. Maybe the child says like ball down or get down, something along those lines. So that's a strategy that I like to kind of give parents to add to their toolbox. I think another thing that I like to do with kids is a lot of toys that kiddos play with have a lot of different like parts. And so one thing that I'll do a lot when I'm playing with kids, especially like, let's say they've taken a whole set of cars out, and like while they're playing and interacting and we're maybe ready, set, go, or pushing the cars back and forth or whatever it might be, I'll just kind of like discreetly kind of take one of the cars off to the side, or maybe we're building a train track and I discreetly kind of just move one of the pieces of the track that I know that they're going to need kind of like right next to me, or I'm gently holding onto it. Not withholding it, I'm just holding on to that piece so that the child can communicate with me in some way that maybe they want it. And again, we're kind of setting up that back and forth exchange that we know is really valuable for communication when we're talking about traditional language acquisition.
Yeah, and you said something before about making engagement and interaction a priority in your play. And I love that. And can you just talk a bit about what that looks like to make engagement and interaction a priority?
Yeah, I mean, really the function of communication is engagement and interact. Like we use communication, whatever style of communication, whether it's verbal or nonverbal, really the sole purpose of it is to engage and interact with often somebody else. And so when that is the priority, that we're using it as a tool to connect, that's kind of where like the magic happens, so to speak. And so it's really about like what I say here on this last point. It's like being down at the child's level. It's going back to that idea of child-led play. And sometimes it's about us kind of like letting down our guard. Like I would not describe myself as like a very playful person. My adult self is a very playful person. But I love playing and interacting with my clients and my friends' kids and stuff like that. And I do have to kind of step outside myself and put on this different hat. But you know, it's like a choice because that interaction is so valuable and it's like intrinsically rewarding to me. And I ultimately know that it often is intrinsically rewarding for the child. And so it's really about like bringing out that inner child in ourselves and being playful and, you know, like I say, like making silly sounds and funny faces and just really focusing on that connection, whatever it might look like for the child that you're playing with. And that can look, like a lot of different things.
I love that. That's great. And, I want to know if you can talk a bit about your book, Playing with Purpose, because I have the book and I love it. It really kind of talks about a lot of different toys and activities and ways you can play and what language you can use and the strategies you can use. Can you talk a bit about your book and your inspiration for your book?
Sure. So I like to think, or I always describe the book as reading more like a cookbook, like a recipe book, than kind of the type of book that you may choose to read cover to cover. You're certainly welcome to lead yourself in whatever direction you want with the book. But the thing that I love about it and that parents have told me is really helpful is that, like you just said, so well, I'll back up for a second. So the book is kind of divided into 5 different chapters or 5 different sections, and there's a whole slew of information at the beginning of the book that talks about a lot of the things that we've talked about today, about what traditional language development might look like, so kind of some basic overarching strategies that you can use with lots of different kinds of interaction. But then the second half of the book is divided up into specific toys or specific activities. So activities I'm talking about like family mealtime, bath, other maybe more people interactions versus interactions with a specific toy or object. And so let's say, this month your kiddo is really interested in playing with Potato Head, which happens to be a favorite toy of mine. Can open to the table of contents, find Potato Head, and just turn to that page, and hopefully very quickly have a few new or different ideas of how you can sort of support all different components of a child's language when you're interacting with it, assuming that that's the choice that your child is making. And so, it was just, again, like an expansion of this idea that a friend gave me early on in kind of my private practice career. And so I find that speech language pathologists, especially newer clinicians, or maybe clinicians that are transitioning, maybe you've worked in the public schools with elementary age students and you're transitioning to private practice, or you're going to do home health or ECI, and you just kind of want to refresh your memory and kind of build up your own skills and tools as an SLP to then support the parents that you're working with. And I find it's also really valuable for parents. Often, like I give it as a gift to all my friends that have kids. It can also be a really valuable tool for grandparents who maybe haven't played and interacted with kids in that really playful, child-centered way, especially if you are the parent of a child who has like a language disorder or delay, and maybe there's a grandparent that does some caregiving for you. So it can be valuable for that too.
And I think it's a great tool for parents and speech language pathologists just to kind of give them more ideas. And I didn't think about this. To be honest, I haven't done Mr. Potato Head in a really long time, but you just gave me the idea. Like, wait, maybe I should have that in my repertoire. But another thing you mentioned in the book that I'm wondering if you could just talk briefly about, because I have used it before as a quick way to talk to parents. And just to remember myself, is the 1, 2, 3 rule, or I don't know exactly how you say it in the book, but can you?
It's just, like this, like you said, it's a tool that I thought of early on. So in addition to, working one-on-one, I also do some volunteer work in Austin with an organization that kind of has like what I would describe as like support groups for new parents. And I often get invited to groups to just talk to parents about like what language development looks like, and just kind of like what you and I are talking about, like what are some things that parents can be mindful of or know as they're going into those early months and years of a child's play. And And I think my experience is that often like new parents are kind of really interested in, or I think just as caregivers in general, like we want to know kind of where it's difficult to not kind of like want to know where our child is in comparison to what we might describe as typical in terms of development. So I just developed this tool to kind of help parents like really quickly remember some of the things that we look for or might anticipate a child doing early in their language development. And so the 1, 2, 3 refers to those early years of a child. So at 1 year old, at 2 years old, and at 3 years old. And then we're looking at both components, both their expressive language and their receptive language or their comprehension. And I think as SLPs, a lot of what I think about and what is often most relevant for parents when we're thinking about comprehension is like a child's ability to kind of follow a direction, like go get your shoes and bring them to me, right? Because like you're going to leave the house. Like that's a common directive we might give a kiddo as a parent. And so the 1, 2, 3 just kind of takes us through that. So when we're talking about receptive language, we know often children in the 1 year range can follow a 1-step direction. Then at 2, we're looking for kids to follow a direction that has 2 steps or 2 parts. And at 3, where we anticipate that kids might be able to follow a more complex multi-step direction. And then the same goes for when we're talking about their expressive language or their expressive vocabulary. We know that often children develop first words around their first birthday or in that, like 12 to, we'll say, 15-ish month range in a really traditional developmental trajectory. And then at 2, we look for kids to start combining 2 words together. And at 3, we're looking for and anticipating children will start to combine 3 and more words together into really simple sentences. And so it's just a quick way to remember those markers.
Yeah, I think that's great. I really like that. And I saw it in the book and it's kind of stuck with me. Like, wow, this is a really great way to kind of take that more complex information and have it just in a quick, easy way to explain it and remember it.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks for that.
Yeah.
Well, can you tell listeners and people who are watching this pod course, can you tell people where they can learn more about you and where they can find you and find your book?
So you can find pretty much all the information that we talked about today and things related to me on Instagram. So I'm at Tandem Speech, tandem being the idea of working together. And the book and all the resources related to it, you can find by searching for Playing with Purpose. The website, I often shorten Playing with Purpose to PWP. So you can find that at pwpbook.com, or if you search for Tandem Speech on Google, you will find me there.
Well, thank you so much. This has been a great interview. I think you have provided so much great information for parents and professionals. So thanks so much.
Yeah, thanks, Kara. It was great talking to you.
Likewise.